know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, did you ever imagine in your lifetime that you would ever say something either on TV or on radio or on a podcast, and someone would take whatever you've said, maybe like a weird, quirky statement of yours, and put it on a T-shirt?
Had you told me that, I would say that would be ridiculous if that ever happened.
Kind of funny you say ridic, because on the SDPN shop website, there is now a ridic collection. CJ, you've made it. The ridic collection. There's at least shirts. I know that for sure. There's a few other things there as well. I think on mugs too.
There's a mug.
But, yo, man, you've made it, dude. I just got to applaud you today.
I should be drinking my good coffee out of a ridic mug in future weeks.
Yes. So seriously, if you go to the SDPN website, go to the shop page, you can now find the collection for That's Ridic. For context, there was an episode where CJ said ridic as short for ridiculous, and everyone has caught on since. So yeah, you can now wear stuff that says ridic on it. So yeah, go over to the SDPN website, go to the shop page, and you can find it there. So thank you. Shout out to the powers that be for actually making it a reality.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that's from the first Sunglasses episode post trade deadline, the morning after trade deadline. So I was in a bit of a goofy weekend at Bernie's type mood, and I don't know where ridic came from, but now it's sweeping the nation.
Well, you know what's the logical next step, right? Like CJ branded sunglasses. Like that has to be it. Like CJ, like the sunglasses, you have like a CJ like sticker on the side. Like that has to be it.
Well, let's just let our imaginations take us as far as they can.
Absolutely. That's as best as we can do. Okay, let's actually get to some hockey stuff. This is the first time we're doing an episode post the first game of the Edmonton, Colorado series. We know they're going to play later tonight. The Rangers and the Lightning we're going to get to. But there seems to be some conversations, especially on social media, going around about the rules. And that Cale Makar goal he scored earlier this week, really sick one. But there seems to be some lot of discussion about the offside rule. And I mean, we could talk about that rule, but what do you think of the fact that we've had to deal with that and the Blake Coleman no goal as it was? A lot of people seem to be having questions about rules in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year.
Well, the discussion I wish we were having is, can we get rid of offside reviews altogether? Because if you look in the rule book, I think technically that rule was called correctly, and the linesman on the ice, called it correctly as it's in the rule book. And so the game didn't really need to be stopped there. I suppose there still would have been conversation, though. I mean, if there's no offside review, Sportsnet or ESPN or TNT, I guess in this case, would be showing the replays, and there'd still be a furor over what everyone thought was a blatant offside. But I don't like offside reviews in general. It's funny. I look back. I covered a playoff game. It was Islanders Panthers. I think it was 2016, and there was a game I was covering that turned on. I believe it was that series. Anyway, I know I wrote this. I was like, if it's so close that the human eye can't detect it's offside or onside, but the referee calls it, or the linesman calls it onside, why are we reviewing that and taking goals off the board? So that's actually what I see. I think there's probably a correct application of the rule in the Makar case, but I don't like offside reviews in general. And the rule book, I saw Ray Ferraro getting into this. To be honest, I almost feel like that's a bit beyond my level of understanding. I don't know. I don't know the rule book that well, if I'm being honest. I understand the rules of the game, but in terms of the language in the book, I haven't studied that. And so I don't have a strong opinion there. I trust Ray implicitly. He's a smart guy. And I suspect if he's digging into this on Twitter, he's got good reason to. But man, the rules of the sport are rather gray at times. I think that's just a fact.
I don't like that they're gray. I don't like that there's an interpretation for kicking a puck in or a delayed offside or an off or straight offside as it is. Like, I'm all for simplicity. So if there's a way to rewrite some of those rules to make them more simple, I am all for it. That being said, I agree with you on the Makar case. I think they called it right after seeing enough clips of similar plays from the past before that goal. It looks like they applied it correctly.
Yes. And that's the thing. Like, they're not making it up on the fly with that one. I mean, it's clear when it's a tag up offside. And in this case, Makar hasn't touched the puck in the offensive zone before Nichushkin tags up. That is, gets back out of the blue line to come back in. That was a correct interpretation of the rule. There's 4 or 5 other examples I saw bouncing around. They've called it that way before, I guess, is the point. It's not like this is just this one crazy instance and they interpreted the rule crazy. I mean, you might not like the rule. I mean, that's almost a different discussion, but it does appear as it was applied correctly here. And in fact, the Oilers believe that themselves. Once they've had a time to look at it and have the explanation, have a discussion with the league, I think the Oilers are satisfied that the right call was made there. So, the controversy in this case isn't so much about that goal. All signs point to that should be a goal. I suppose it's moving forward. Do you still want that kind of play to be considered a goal? Is there a way to maybe have the rule be a little bit more clear cut? Again, I'm not trying to take a total pass. I just don't have a strong opinion there. I don't know how easy that would be to accomplish. But the one thing I do know is I do not like the offside reviews. I think that it's if a play happens and it's not clearly offside in real time and everyone keeps playing and a goal goes in, I just think it should be a goal. If there's a certain amount that the human eye is going to get wrong, and I really do not like offside reviews, and I'm scared every time we get to these big games that it's going to completely change the complexion of basically the season, which team wins the cup because of something like that.
I don't like offside reviews either, but as we see gambling become more and more part of the fabric of the NHL and sports as well, it's important for these calls to be right. And as a result, having an offside review makes sense, even if it's not something that's ideal.
Well, what about baseball? I mean, I'm a Blue Jays fan. Like, I watch all kinds of games and the strike zone is all wacky depending on the umpire. Like, those results still stand, right? If there's over under strikeouts that you could probably bet on for a pitcher, and depending on the strike zone, that determines in some ways what happens with a number of strikeouts. I mean, I think that in sports we have to live with the fact that it's not going to ever be perfect. I mean, that much I know is sure. We could be doing this podcast in 100 years. There could be robot umpires, referees, whatever it is, whatever the cutting edge technology of the day is, and I'm sure that we could still find instances where a call is made incorrectly. I don't think that. It's not to say we shouldn't strive to be as accurate as possible. Like, I'm not throwing up my hands and going, well, let's let chaos reign. Let's just keep flipping coins and see what happens. But I do think that we should be comfortable with the idea that some things it's just going to escape it. And with the offside review, I just don't see them. The linesmen don't miss very many. There was one famous one years ago where Matt Duchene was literally like 5 feet offside and it led to a goal. But that's
why we have offside reviews in the first place.
Right. But that's like one out of like how many thousand goals in a year? Like, that it was like one really bad screw up, but it's not like all those kind of bad screw up happen all the time. And really the goals that are coming off the board, again, are ones where everybody keeps playing on the ice because everybody thinks it's onside. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute, it was a hair offside now that we slowed it down. And so, they've at least changed the rule where you can have your skate off the ice. Remember, the skate had to be on the ice, and then we're like literally taking goals back on just, a fraction of an inch of a player skating. They've at least made it a little bit, I guess, softer that way, but I just don't see. I like there has to be some goal review. Obviously, I don't think offside review should be part of it.
I have a question. What if for the offside review they added some type of time limit? Say, like, if the goal happens within like 10, 15 seconds of the offside occurring, that is a reviewable point, and anything beyond that is not reviewable. Does that make sense?
I think it makes some sense, but then I worry that we get into like one is 10.002 seconds after. And I think that you could, I understand the spirit though, right? Because like, you're right. After a certain point, if everyone has just kept playing, how far back can you go? But, I'm sure they'll keep tweaking this stuff. I mean, look, these conversations are all happening. We're 2 weeks away, give or take, from a general manager's meeting. I'm sure the Coleman situation will be discussed there. Again, it doesn't mean there'll be changes, but it'll be looked at away from the emotion of the actual call in the game. And, the GMs will have a chance to weigh in on whether it was the right call, whether something needs to be changed or adjusted in the rules or the wording of the rules. And I would think this will be discussed too. But, back to the original point, I mean, my Twitter feed blew up, I'm sure the same way yours did, in real time on that Makar goal, but the actual correct call was made there.
It was. One other thing on the Makar play. I also saw a handful of people say.
What a shot, too. I mean, unfortunately, we're not talking about what a ridiculous goal that was, but
obviously something else has taken precedence here. On that play, though, I've also seen a handful of people say that, now that this is allowed, more and more people are just going to do what Cale Makar did, which essentially just let the puck go in before he touches up as Nichushkin is tagging up. So what do you think of that premise that more and more players are going to do that?
Well, by all means, that would be playing within the rules. Go for it. I think it's much easier said than done at the speed the game's played. And, generally the opposing team is stepping up at the blue line to challenge you before entering the zone. So if you want to just push it in and give up that little bit of possession, you might be turning the puck over at a spot your coach doesn't want you to turn it over at. So I think that I don't have any problem if people want to try that. I don't think it's as easily executed as it looks. And actually, in that case, I'm not even sure to what degree he was doing all that on purpose, to be honest. I mean, it was pretty quick play, bang, bang, bang into the net. But the fact of the matter is they got it right, and they called it right on the ice. I think give the linesman credit there. It was correctly called in real time. And so, that to me tells you it's enforceable that way. And I'm fine if more players want to try it.
In fact, we haven't hyped it up enough to the point where we give Cale Makar credit for saying it was a smart play for him to do, as far as I've seen.
Well, because it's not clear if it's on purpose, right? I mean, either way, it's a smart play. He's aware that his teammate has to come out of the zone, but it happened so quick. Like, I don't know if he meant to lift his stick and so not touch the puck in that moment. It's possible. I mean, he's so good. His puck skills are so good. I can't say he didn't do it on purpose. But unfortunately, I'm sitting here in Toronto, so I definitely don't get a chance to talk to him. But even in today's day and age, I don't know if anyone will really get to him and get an answer on that. But, I do think it's possible he did that on purpose. But either way, I mean, what a player, 4 points in that game. And, I get why we're focused on the controversy, but I really enjoyed game one of that series. And I'm not sure if anyone's going to stop any pucks in it. Honestly, this is not gambling advice, but I feel like, okay, it's not going to be 8-6 every night, but I think we're going to see a ton of goals scored in that series, moving forward. I don't think it's like a defensive adjustment kind of issue. I think the players are too good. And obviously with Kemper hurt and everything going on, I think we're going to see a ton of goal scoring in the Western Conference Final.
We're going to have more of our thoughts of game one of the Western Conference Final and of the Eastern Conference Final in a moment. We have to do sports interaction. Speaking of gambling advice, always, if you're playing with sports interaction, 19 plus and over, we ask that you play responsibly. And there is a link to responsible gaming strategies in the description of this show. Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Except David Bastel is not here. So it's just CJ and I. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. On Sports Interaction's website right now for the Edmonton, Colorado series, Edmonton at a 4.17 to be the series winner. That is a lot if you're trying to pick a series winner between those two teams. Does that mean that Colorado is essentially a lock to win?
Well, that's what the odds are pointing it towards. I mean, look, after game one, I can see where they're coming from to a certain degree. It's hard to watch. I know Edmonton rallied in that game and full marks to them for doing so, but Colorado blew them out of the water in the early part. I mean, the Oilers are very tentative, obviously difficult building to play in their Ball Arena. And, the Avalanche are just friggin' good up and down the lineup. So they're ridiculous. Some might say. So, and now Edmonton's in a hole. So I get the odds makers going that way. I'm sure the betting action's going that way. But, the one thing I'll say is the series is 7 games, and what happens in game 1 isn't, and this holds true for any series, doesn't necessarily tell us what's going to happen in game 2, 3, 4, 5 down the line. And, it reminds me a little bit of Edmonton Calgary game 1, where they were down big and sort of mounted a comeback, got that game back to 6-6 and got some of their big players in the series. I mean, that's a little bit what happened here. And so we'll see if they can maybe start pushing the odds more in their favor by winning game 2 and taking the series back to Edmonton.
So Edmonton 4.17, Colorado at 1.20. By comparison, in the Rangers Lightning series, Rangers at 1.79 to win the series, Tampa Bay Lightning at 1.95. Even after the Rangers won as big as they did, that series is also close.
Well, and that also makes sense to me. I mean, I'm willing to give Tampa a total pass on game 1. Just given what we've seen from them so consistently, having more than a week after eliminating the Panthers in the second round, the start of the third, I can see why that game happened. Wasn't Vasilevsky's best, wasn't their team's best. They didn't have a great effort, but they're still a pretty monumental task in front of the Rangers to win 3 more of the next 6 games to move on. And so I get why that one's viewed a little bit more closely, and we'll just see how it goes. But Tampa never lost 2 games in a row for 3 straight playoffs. Like, I know we trot it out every time they lose, but it's a crazy stretch. I think they're 42-18 in the playoffs since the start of 2020. And so, that just tells you how hard it's going to be still, even after getting game 1 for the Rangers to advance to the Cup final.
That's going to do it for You Can Bet That. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Again, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. We have now seen game 1 in the Eastern and the Western Conference final. Which of these 2 games do you want to start off with first in terms of your general impressions and thoughts?
Well, let's start with Edmonton, Colorado, because that'll be the one that's made most moot most quickly, because they play again in a matter of hours for when we're recording this.
Cool. So with Edmonton and Colorado, we knew that there was going to be star power, a goal scoring bonanza potentially, but the fact that we were able to get it off of game 1, from the jump, an 8-6 game. We mentioned earlier with Cale McCarr doing as well as he did. Did off that one game, did that series already match our expectations or surpass them?
Oh, I think it surpassed it. I mean, so often when we hype up a specific angle in a hockey game, I find it doesn't happen. That played out about as much as you would expect. I think a lot of people view Colorado as the favorite entering the series in that game on home ice. So, their big boys did what you'd expect and all had a dent on the score sheet. Edmonton didn't go quietly. I think it really lived up to billing, and no one's going to want to talk about the goaltending of the series, I don't think, but I still think it's going to have a huge impact here. And the fact that Darcy Kemper appears injured, unavailable, I don't know how long that's going to last. I don't have any real update on his condition, but he had to leave a game where his team was ahead in the Western Conference final. I mean, no player is doing that unless they absolutely can't play. And so, that could also have a say here, but I think the goals will keep coming. I don't imagine this will suddenly go into a bunch of 2-1 games. Neither team is meant to play that way. I mean, when the Avalanche have the puck, they are just rocket fuel everybody towards the offensive zone, often with a D jumping in, trying to create 4-on-2 or 4-on-3 situations. When you do that, you're at risk, of course, of turnovers, and then, odd man rushes going the other way. You had Wayne Gretzky on the TNT panel saying, these guys got to play defense. I made my whole career on offense, but these guys got to play some defense. I hope they didn't listen too closely to Wayne, because I think it's a lot of fun. I haven't seen hockey like this. I know the 80s were like this, but let's face it, I was alive, but I wasn't really consciously watching hockey in the 80s. I was really more of the 90s when I started watching the NHL. And so this is even new to me. As long as I've been around the sport, I haven't seen so many games where you can expect this. I mean, we've seen already Edmonton play a 9-6 and an 8-6 game in one playoffs. This is after a regular season. There was a 10-7 game with Detroit and Toronto. Like it's like normal that this is happening now. And I think it's awesome. And this series gives us all hope. As I'm saying, I hope it doesn't devolve into 2-1 games and everybody worried about defense because that was a hell of a lot of fun in game one. And it's got me pumped to see what we're going to see in game two and going forward.
It's not as if Colorado and Edmonton can't play defense at all. It's just that they're two teams who their best way of attacking is to use their offense. So if we saw like 2-1 games, it would pretty much go against both of those teams' identities. So thank God, like we saw the goals that we saw in game one.
Well, and look, we might see it 2-1 or 3-2 game. It might be because one of the goalies makes 50 saves. I mean, I can live with that, of course. I mean, if someone stands on his head, that's fine. I'm not saying it has to be 8-6 every night, but I just love the flair. I mean, it's breathtaking how fast the game is, and how quickly Colorado was responding. Like Edmonton scores like bam in the net right after, bam in the net right after, like 5 goals in the first period of that series. Like that's great. I mean, I think it's a lot of fun. It makes it where you can never feel too comfortable with what's going to happen. And even we saw Edmonton clawed back from getting into a big deficit and made it a game. And so, I think that is a winning recipe for the NHL. I don't know that it can be repeated. We're talking 2 of the best offensive teams in the league now, facing each other head to head. And then obviously some of the top individual offensive stars. I mean, there's pretty special circumstances, but this is why we had McDavid, McKinnon, like the boxing poster, going into the series. I think that's great for the NHL. And that's what I mean. I hope that these guys keep delivering and putting up silly numbers and breaking records and all that stuff. Like I don't see a downside, quite frankly. I mean, maybe some of the purists will be banging their fist against the table, but I think it's great for the sport. And I just know personally, I'm enjoying it.
Considering the performance that Cale Makar put on in game one, should we have actually made the poster McDavid versus Makar? I mean, you already have a forward going up against a defenseman as opposed to 2 forwards going at each other.
I think you could have. I mean, this guy is so clearly special. There's really not necessarily another player like him in the league. He's not afraid to jump in offensively. I think that's where his gifts are, but he's scoring in ways that we really haven't seen many defensemen. I guess like Erik Karlsson in his prime, maybe, or Mike Green even had a 30-goal season for the Washington Capitals back in the day. But I think you could I would have been fine with that, or have like the undercard be Draisaitl Makar. Either way, it's of course, like the draw here isn't just that it's 2 guys. Everyone on the lower cards here are pretty good. I mean, we barely talked about Evander Kane. He's got a goal a game in 13 playoff games. Zach Hyman's continued to score for them. Nazem Kadri's scoring for Colorado. You still got Landeskog and Rantanen in there. I mean, it's just there's talent up and down the lineups, 2 lines deep and really into the 3rd line. And then you got the big boys at the top who, I think ultimately will on some level decide the series. Doesn't mean every game they're going to have 4 points apiece, but it's a pretty big, something big stands in front of both these guys, right? Like Nathan McKinnon, if you remember last year, was just, it's like someone had shot his dog at his exit interview. And, he was saying that he's been in the league 9 years. I'm paraphrasing. I haven't accomplished anything. Like he must feel that way. And Connor McDavid, even for all the scoring titles and everything he's compiled, the Hart trophies and it all, like, that it doesn't matter. Like what matters to him is getting his hands on the shiny silver thing. And so, they have to go through the fact they have to go through each other to get a chance to play for it. I think is so compelling in and of itself. And as a result, given their talent and given what's at stake, I just don't see how these 2 aren't the main drivers of what happens as this series goes along.
I don't remember if I asked you on the last episode, but between McDavid and McKinnon, which of these 2 superstars do you think is under the most pressure to win this series?
Maybe McKinnon, just because he's a little older. And, we're viewing his team as being better and the odds makers are viewing his team as being better. I think that's probably the case, but look, they're both going to feel into crazy internal pressure. I mean, that's how you get as good as they have been. Their drivetrain is much deeper and much more intense than anyone on the outside could put on them. But I think because McKinnon's a little older and Colorado's not necessarily going to be quite as deep moving forward. I mean, we'll see. They've got a great front office, so it's not saying it can't be done, but they're definitely going to face some challenges and some hard decisions in the near future on contracts. And so this is a great opportunity for him. McDavid, I don't see this quite the same pressure in Edmonton. I think they're going to return a pretty similar team, and he's going to have more cracks at it, just by virtue of his age.
Okay. Last thing with the goaltending, because Darcy Kuemper does leave game one. It seems as if he's still having issues with his eye, which we know that occurred during the Nashville series in the first round. Do you, if Pavel Francouz has to be the guy going forward for Colorado, how do you think that affects their chances for this series?
Well, I think it weakens them. Francouz he's not new in the league and he's played big games, but Kuemper has been the better goaltender for them this season and really across his career. You just hope the best for Kuemper. He's a pending unrestricted free agent. So there's, the business side to consider here, but obviously the personal side, anytime you have an injury in and around the eye and your vision for any player, it's scary. And especially a goaltender. So I do think that it brings in the possibility for chaos, man. It brings in maybe the Justus Antonin. I know he's a, pretty highly rated prospect in the Avalanche organization. He's now in kind of as a number 3/number 2. And we've seen so many goaltenders across all the series. I mean, maybe you're throwing another sort of not yet known player, at least at the NHL level, into the biggest games. Could end up being the biggest games of his career. So I think it could have a huge impact on the series. How Mike Smith rebounds will as well. We saw him lit up in the Calgary series, but he's been really good all playoffs long. But you wonder, can he keep that up? Can he rebound? Where's his mind at? I mean, I think goaltending is still going to have a huge say in what happens as well, because of all the offensive talent. If anyone can find something there and get some big saves, it's going to, tilt the scales in their direction.
Speaking of goaltending, we expected goaltending to be the marquee thing to look out for in the Eastern Conference Final with the Rangers and the Lightning. And then Andrei Vasilevsky allows 6 goals against the New York Rangers as the Broadway Blue Shirts win game 1. What did you think of that game?
I give Tampa a total pass. Like I'm not reaching any judgment on them until I see them play at least game 2 of the series. And even if they were to lose game 2, I would still not be saying like they're in huge trouble. And obviously the stakes are real in the playoffs. Every game really matters and it gets more important as the series goes along. But I just think those guys have earned the right to kind of have a stinker, and it was a bit of a stinker. And I don't think we can avoid the fact they did have all that time off. It's not an excuse. I just think if you don't play a game for 9 days while the other team's been playing every other day, it's going to have some impact on the way things go. And now they're in a fight. I mean, what's interesting is most people forget they got smacked right at the start of the playoffs, right? I think it was 5-1 the first game against the Leafs, something like that, 5-2 maybe. But it was anyway.
They got beat.
They got beat pretty good, and like they didn't even. I was covering that series. Like they didn't even blink. Like I remember the next day they had a practice out at the rink, and talking to some of their guys, the way John Cooper conducted himself, it's just like, yeah, that happened. That's gone, and we know the way that series went. I just don't think that they have so much experience and so much confidence in the way that they play when they're at their best that they just know that wasn't anywhere near their best, and they're going to have to bring it when they get to game 2. And so, I'm not going to make any bold predictions out of game 1, other than to say the Lightning have lots of life, even after losing that one in rather dispiriting fashion.
That being said, I give full marks to the Rangers at how they played. Philip Hedl and his line doing an excellent job. Keandre Miller also doing really well. And the Igor's better chance, well-deserved for Igor Shesterkin. I'm not ready to say he's better than Andrei Vasilevsky yet, but on that night, Igor Shesterkin looked better than Andrei Vasilevsky.
Awesome. And look at Igor Shesterkin was better across the regular season than Andrei Vasilevsky. I think if you had to pick one goaltender with your life on the line, sort of a Bill and Ted's kind of situation here, I'm still taking Vasilevsky, just given, what we've seen him do and the way he can really channel his focus. He's just so big, so athletic. I still think he's the best goalie in the league, but Shesterkin has made a ridiculously strong start to his NHL career too. If you look at the numbers, I think he's like 928 career save percentage. I mean, it's so far and above average that he's got a chance to, over time, start taking some of that away from Vasilevsky. I mean, that's how this goes. You become the best. You get that sort of best label by beating the other best, and now the contenders are taking shots at him. I love it. I think it's a cool undercard to this series. The fact they're both Russian makes it more interesting as well. Just, countrymen battling for that. And, the Rangers are so lucky. I think I made the point on a previous pod, but to jump right from Henrik Lundqvist to Shesterkin is, it's like going from Brett Favre, Darren Rodgers, or,
yes,
like Mario Lemieux to Sidney Crosby, although Pittsburgh did have some, tough middle years there. Lemieux did retire for a couple of years, but it just going from like this one to the next one is unbelievable turn of fortune for the organization. Great job, obviously, drafting both those players. They weren't first overall picks and developing them, but yeah, that was you're right. That was a great chant from the crowd at the Garden, and Shesterkin will be thinking that he'll be embracing the chance to try to be a player that I'm sure he's looked up to. I mean, he's only 2 years younger, but the player that's done all the things that he wants to do over in this league in North America.
And it's helped that his offense in front of him has helped out tremendously. I mean, Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad combining on that goal within seconds of the game starting. Kreider has had himself a great postseason, as well as Zibanejad. Adam Fox continuing to put up points from the back end as well. I already mentioned K'Andre Miller. And again, I'm going to bring up Philip Hedl, who has found a way to put up heaters in all these different games throughout the postseason. That core for the Rangers, we're still a couple of years off from the letter where the organization said there's going to be pain for the next few years. And they've been able to assemble this roster that, looking at how well they're playing right now, like if maybe they make a couple tweaks here and there, but they could be making runs to the conference final for a while if they keep this up.
Yeah, this should be an exciting time if you're a fan of that team or you're working in the organization, because you're seeing, I don't know every team sets the bar at the Stanley Cup pretty much every year to start, but I don't know if they really believe that. But it's happened so quickly, and full marks to them. I think the one difference to put a point on the goaltending conversation, though, that we should be tracking this series is the Rangers tend to rely on Shesterkin a lot, and he's been able to handle that, but they give up a lot of chances. They give up a lot of shots, and the Lightning at their best really close things down in front of Vasilevsky. And so I just wonder if that will eventually become kind of a dynamic at play there. It's not just the goaltenders head to head. It's the way the team play unfolds in front of them, the kind of chances that are given up. I think that's something to keep watching. But I also see that as a positive for the Rangers that I make that point, because I think there's an area of clear growth in front of them where that's something they can tighten up over time, or maybe make a few personnel adjustments that have them basically control more of the shot share and take some of the burden off the shoulders of that guy between the pipes. I mean, it's great that he can make the saves. It's maybe not as extreme as Winnipeg, but it reminds me of the Jets. Connor Hellebuyck's been one of the better goaltenders in the league, and certainly his best goes head to head with pretty much the best of any other player. But it just seems for too many years, the Jets relied on him to be that great, and there wasn't much margin for error if he ever wasn't on his game. I see the potential for something similar with New York. And so, they're not a fully formed group. And some of their young guys, I think, are still going to get that much more impactful, like in the immediate future. I mean, like next year, they'll be better than this year, and 2 years from now, same thing. But I mean, no reason to think they won't be hanging around and playing all kinds of playoff games for the next 5 seasons.
Yeah, and they could be off. They could be in a worse position with the guys they have at the back end with Fox and Trouba and Miller. They have some pretty good defense at the back end. They can still play a good defensive structure. They've shown it at times in the postseason as well. But you're right, they do tend to allow a lot of shots for Shesterkin. It could happen where they could get a lot better. I just think with this core, with the way they've assembled everything right now, and I understand them being in New York, it's a lot easier for them to lure in free agents and other high quality players. But if I was a Rangers fan right now, I would be over the moon. If you include the three, I think like Shesterkin was like 3-0-0 against the Lightning. He's now 4-0-0 this year against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I would be over the moon as a Rangers fan.
Absolutely. I mean, start getting excited. Like this, as much as we're talking about the future, the present is really all that matters. Because things happen in sports. Like we can say this, like, oh, this team's going to be here forever. But sometimes you fast forward 6 years and you're still trying to win your first playoff round with that group of star players. And that's not even a shot at the Leafs. It's just the truth. Like there's no guarantees it's going to happen ever. And so they're here. There's 7 wins as we're recording this from winning the Stanley Cup. You might as well go win those 7 games right now. Like delaying it another 12 months, just assuming you'll be back in the third round, like all kinds of things can happen. Other teams get better. You get injuries. I mean, it's a crazy sport, as we know. I mean, look, we took some heat from some of our listeners, and rightfully so, for not talking about the Rangers enough. We might now be talking about a team going to the Stanley Cup final. We didn't give them any flowers all regular season long, or only a very small amount of flowers. And so, look, it just goes to show. I think that's some surprising things that you don't expect to happen unfold, and they got a hell of an opportunity in their hands at this moment. We saw Braden Point skating, which was a good sign on the surface. We also saw him, fall basically awkwardly shooting after on an empty net. Like he's clearly in a difficult spot. I mean, that guy is the ultimate gamer. I had so much respect for Point as a player. And he's going to try to get back. But I mean, the Lightning also aren't the full Lightning, and they have played a lot of games, and being without him as a second line, having two top lines the way they have for a lot of their success in recent Stanley Cup playoffs, with Point being out, I think that there's also opportunity there for the Rangers to shock the world and get to the final.
I don't think we see Braden Point at all in this series. What if Tampa but what if they make the final? Do you think we get to see Braden Point at all for the rest of this postseason?
If you say that they're going to play in the Cup final, like if that's our premise, so we're talking basically up to 3.5, 4 weeks of more hockey from now, I think we see him play a game. Now, I don't know how effective he'll be. I don't know if it'll be like a Steven Stamkos circa the Edmonton bubble, like 5 shifts and scores a goal kind of game. But I think you're going to see him, if he's already skating, he's doing literally everything he can to get back. And so if you give him another potentially 3.5, 4 weeks of runway in terms of with the Lightning schedule playing out that much longer, I do think you see him play. But I'm with you. I don't, it's not like I'm keeping an eye on him for game 2 or anything like that in this series. I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, I don't even know what percent he's at, but that guy's got the heart of a champion, and I think he'll will himself back into the lineup if they get a chance to get back to the Cup final.
Okay, let's transition over to an article you wrote for North Star Bets. The NHL playoffs have been a war of attrition between the pipes. And you can say that for a number of teams in this postseason, but you focused a lot on the Carolina Hurricanes situation. They didn't have a healthy Freddie Anderson. They had to rely on Antti Raanta, and it looked as if it might have just worked out for them until the very end of their second round series, where we had to see Pyotr Kochetkov a handful of times. It didn't work for the Carolina Hurricanes. Them not winning away from home also didn't help either. But yeah, I wanted to talk more about the article that you wrote. The NHL playoffs have been a war of attrition between the pipes.
Well, here's how I view it. Unless you have Andrei Vasilevsky or Igor Shesterkin, which, 25 teams don't have anyone close to as reliable as that. Like, I feel like the position has never been less certain. There's potholes everywhere for GMs making goaltending decisions, because objectively, Carolina did a good job last summer. They traded Alex Nedeljkovic away. They let James Reimer and Peter Mrazek walk in free agency. They replaced them with Frederik Andersen and Antti Raanta. Obviously took some risk there. Those are 2 goaltenders when healthy that both have delivered excellent NHL careers, but they both had stretches and recent stretches where they weren't healthy. Well, what do those 2 guys do? I remember speaking to Rod Brindamore at the All-Star weekend in Vegas, and he was nervous. He's like, you're nervous when you basically completely turn over your goaltending. You don't know what you're going to get. And it worked tremendously. Carolina wins the Metropolitan Division. Those guys win the William M. Jennings Trophy for allowing the fewest goals in the regular season as a tandem. But then you get to game 7 of the second round, and neither of them is available after Raanta left that game injured. And so, I kind of see it as, if you're not fortunate to be in Julian Brisebois' shoes or Chris Drury's shoes and have sort of the player that's shown that he's not only amazing, but he's durable. Because that's Andrei Vasilevsky, as much as we can rave about his numbers in game 7s, Like, he has played more than any goaltender other than Connor Hellebuck in the last 3 regular seasons, and he has played every Tampa Bay Lightning playoff game on those 2 cup runs, and then this third year now. I mean, he's played so much more hockey than anyone else at his position, going back to 2019, and he's been amazing. So, like, he's not just he's eating up minutes, and he's elite in his performance. And so, I think beyond that, it's a real roll of the dice. And, like, I think it's interesting even to rewind back to we can go back 2 years, right? So 2 years ago in free agency, the Edmonton Oilers are not feeling comfortable with their goaltending. They try really hard to get Jacob Markstrom. Well, Markstrom ends up signing up the highway in Calgary. Now, they just eliminated Markstrom, and they still have the same 2 goalies they had when they weren't completely comfortable with what they had then. And then last summer, Edmonton tries to trade for Darcy Kemper from Arizona, is involved quite heavily in those discussions. He ultimately goes to Colorado. Now they're facing, of course, Kemper, although he's out injured in this series, in this round. Well, what was Colorado trying to do that day? First of all, they were trying to re-sign Philip Grubauer the morning of July 28th last summer. That didn't happen. At the same time, they had discussions with Frederik Andersen's camp. Andersen ultimately decided he couldn't wait for the Grubauer situation to play out. He signs in Carolina. Like, what I'm saying is all these teams that were sniffing around a Stanley Cup this year were kind of going after a lot of the same goaltenders. And now they're, in some cases it's worked and some it hasn't. I don't know that you can lay blame certainly at the GM's feet. So, I mean, I guess the GM ultimately makes the decisions. And so he's responsible for what plays out. But, I think some of this is luck, because 13 of the 16 teams that have played in this year's playoffs have used at least 2 goaltenders, and Pittsburgh used 3 in round 1. And we're in a situation now where, Tampa's one of the ones that hasn't used 2. So we could still get to 14 out of 16 if we see Brian Elliott, play at some point in the playoffs, which could happen through injury or performance for Vasilevsky. And so, man, it's never been less clear, I think, what you can do with your goaltending. Injuries seem to be popping up more than ever. UC Saros was a workhorse for Nashville, been one of the best goalies, I'd say, the last 2 regular seasons, was a Vezina finalist last year. He gets injured in the last week or 2 of the regular season. He doesn't play in the playoffs. Anderson didn't play at all in the playoffs. I'm not, it's one of these articles where you don't have a conclusion other than, holy shit, I'm glad my job isn't being, gauged on what decision you make with a goaltender, because it just feels less certain than ever, more of a roll of the dice than I can ever recall it being.
Yeah. It's just like, I don't know. I find with goaltending, I was saying this a lot earlier in the postseason, it's not so much about having the goalie kind of carry you through. It's becoming more and more of just having a goalie carry you through. I mean, last year we ended up seeing a Stanley Cup final that had Carey Price and Andrei Vasilevsky, 2 guys at the near pinnacle of the position, but also very handsomely paid in their positions. But we're not that far off from Andrei Vasilevsky versus Anton Khudobin or Matt Murray on like a pretty cheap contract as well. Like, goaltending is just really, you just have to catch fire at the right time.
Right. And Anton Khudobin, that was 2 years ago in the Edmonton bubble. He played a bunch of games in the American Hockey League this year. And that was the same guy that helped Dallas get to the Cup final in the bubble and, got them within 2 wins of the Cup. So who knows? You know what I mean? Like, I love the old goaltending is voodoo statement, but I think it's like voodoo, black magic, and, where's the is Mercury in retrograde? Like trying to figure this thing out. You're trying to you're lining up all these things, and let's face it, some good luck plays into it, because all the players were saying, as I say, like when Frederik Andersen played this year, he was awesome. Antti Ranta, frankly, if you look across his whole career, he's consistently been an above average performer, but he's also consistently dealt with just crazy series of injuries. And so, you want those guys on your team, but you're just hoping they can stay healthy and get through a season. Even Mike Smith, it looked like a total disaster for Edmonton at the start of this year. He missed the first 2 months of the season, essentially, played a couple games right out of the gate and lost 5 in a row when he actually got back in the lineup. And then, but then he's maybe more rested when he gets to this playoff run, and he's been really good across the playoffs. I mean, we'll see what happens now. He's facing a challenge unlike any he's seen from against the Kings or Flames with Colorado's top players. But it feels like the Wild West with goalies. And ideally, you probably need 3 guys you sort of could trust, and you just hope one of them gets hot when it matters. But I don't know how you do that. I don't know. It's really hard for teams. You look at a team like the Leafs coming up this offseason. Even Edmonton's going to have to sign a goaltender, I would think, with Mikko Koskinen's contract expiring. It's just hard to know because those teams are expected to be contenders again next year, but the path to contention isn't exactly clear with the uncertainty at that position.
I just found it hilarious with Edmonton. On this podcast, we've said, okay, they're going to be in the market for a goalie. A lot of people are saying, man, they got to get a goalie. They got to trade for Marc-Andre Fleury. They got to go and get this guy. They tried to get Jacob Marchand, but didn't work. Mike Smith is not going to be the guy. We've been banging that drum for months and months on end. And here they are in the conference final with Mike Smith.
Who do we all talk about? Like Jonas Korpisalo, Braden Holtby, like trade targets in season. We wondered about Marc-Andre Fleury, and that never had any legs. But, you're right. We discuss that so much. I mean, look at the goaltending probably cost Dave Tippett his job more than anything. If you look at that 15-game stretch through December and January where they won about 2 games, like they got no goaltending. They were down 1-0. It felt like when every game started. There was a game they actually played against the Rangers at Madison Square Garden, and Dave Tippett just threw Mikko Koskinen right under the bus afterwards. Like in a way you don't see a coach do often. But it's sort of like, what can we do? Like we're controlling everything and the pucks are going in. It's such a critical position, obviously. And when you don't have it, there's almost no way to compensate for it. But yeah, I mean, look, it's great. If you have Vasilevsky, you sign him to that contract. If you have peak career Carey Price, you just hold tightly onto those guys. But even Carey, unfortunately, right, his career has run into a number of injuries, going back over several years. And then, added on to some personal issues this year that kept him, from playing very many games. So there's no certainty. There's just no certainty with goaltending. But I am certain you need good goaltending to win a cup. You need it in that moment. And sometimes it comes from unexpected places.
You need a goalie, not necessarily the goalie.
I like that one. Patent that one, bud.
Oh, yeah. We got to use that. That's a CJ show motto. I don't know if we have like lists of mottos and like sayings for the show, but that's something we can just kind of save. Before we get to stick taps, any thoughts on Martin St. Louis and the 3-year contract extension he signs with the Montreal Canadiens?
I'm happy to see him back. We're not surprised to see him back, of course. I think his contract might even have an option for a 4th year. So, I like that we're going to get to see him over multiple seasons. It's kind of my view. And a little bit of an outside the box hiring, by the Canadiens in February. But, the way he speaks and like his views on the game, he's still such a player in mindset, which I think is fascinating. And, I love the quotes he was giving, Julian. I'm sure you were on the conference call about, not sacrificing a couple wins in this coming season over the development of his younger players. I mean, this idea that he's trying to build a team to win over a long period of time. I mean, not every coach is afforded that kind of luxury, right? I mean, some coaches, they're coaching for their job every season. And so, they need a team that's gunning for the playoffs. But it seems like Montreal is taking a wider view. And I just think with a coach like St. Louis, with his approach, where literally a guy who's been through waivers, been a 4th liner, been an Art Ross Trophy winner, been an All-Star, won a Stanley Cup. I mean, really just run the gamut of his career as a player. I think he can relate to the different, situations on his roster. And I think he's going to coach in a manner that's a little different. And so I'm kind of curious to see how that all plays out and what it means, obviously, for whoever this number 1 draft pick is that the Canadiens make next month. But also Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki and some of the younger players on the roster that I think are really going to benefit from a different approach from the coach. Yeah,
like this 3-year extension, I kind of see it like this for St. Louis. That first year, so next year, all about continuing to develop your players and ensure that whether it's Shane Wright or Juraj Slafkovsky or whoever else is drafted, if they're on the team or not, and all the other young players, ensuring that they continue to progress. And I still think that, considering the fact they finished in last place, like the bar doesn't need to be raised all, like the floor is they're at the floor. Like if they jump up from 32nd to 28th, that's still progress of some sort. They don't need to win that much. They don't need to be competitive next year. I'm curious about what it'll be like after year 2, or maybe in year 2, when Martin St. Louis has to get to a point where he has to start winning games? Like, what is that going to be like? Will he have progressed enough as a coach to get to a point where he is all about getting his team to win games? Because I'm sure that lineup will look very different in year 2 compared to what it was this past year and this upcoming season.
Well, I think next year is going to look different too. And I don't get a sense organizationally that the Canadians want to be bad for years. Like, I think that there will be a certain pressure to win at a point, but you're right to point out. I don't think that point is this October. I mean, it'd be great if they could do that. No one's saying lose on purpose. If somehow you can get these young guys playing in a way, if maybe that number 1 overall pick is a little bit more ready to make an immediate impact in the NHL. I mean, lots of things can happen. I think of the 16-17 Maple Leafs, when Austin Matthews was a rookie, Mitch Marner was a rookie, they ended up making the playoffs. And I don't think too many people expected that at that point in time. It can happen if you're young guys, if you find someone who can score 40 goals as a rookie, which Austin Matthews did, for example, or something like that, make a real contribution. And yeah, I don't know. I got a feeling about St. Louis. It's just, there's something different there. I mean, obviously we've seen tons of former players become head coaches in the league, but I feel like he's got a real unique view. And I think he's got a lot of self-belief. I mean, he's had to have self-belief to build the career he built. And I see someone who's not going to just follow the industry norms. I see someone who's going to do what he believes is right, do it no matter what anyone writes or says in the media. And when you do that, I think that you have the possibility to really do something special. I think that's what the Lightning organization has done, quite honestly. I mean, obviously they've got great players, but they've gotten them in a lot of different ways. They got Nikita Kucherov, for example. They drafted him at a time a lot of teams were shying away from drafting Russian players because there was a concern in sort of the mid 2010s or early 2010s that Russian players weren't going to sign in the NHL and that you'd be wasting your pick. And they also, that's when they got Vasilevsky and Vlad Nemesnikov and Nikita Nestorov and a bunch of others. They've not followed which way the wind was blowing. They made their own decisions and stuck to it. And I think it's really paid off. And I think that's what you're going to see with St. Louis as a coach. And that's why I really believe, even though he didn't sort of follow the traditional model, climb his way up through the AHL, be an assistant, this and this and that. I actually believe that his will and his intelligence create the possibilities. He's hyper successful.
Yeah, it helps that he has the career that he has, or he had the career that he had in the NHL, and he said it a number of times. He's the best thing he's good at is getting better. He's shown that as a player, and I think for Canadians fans, they'll want him to do that as a head coach. But again, for next year, if he's able to continue the development of their younger players, continuing to build whatever culture they're trying to build with the Montreal Canadiens, that's still going to be a win. I'm sure a lot of fans are still going to want them to be in the sweepstakes for Connor Bedard in the draft next year. But if there's improvement from the players, I don't think too many people can complain too much about what Martin St. Louis does as head coach of the Montreal Canadiens, which is still very, as someone who has seen him play in like his best years, it's still really surreal to like go into the press conference room and see him walk in and be like, oh my God, like I watched you in the 2004 final and I wanted the Lightning to win that year. And now you are the head coach of the Montreal Canadiens, a team I cover. It's a bit surreal for me.
Life comes at you fast, bud.
It absolutely does. Oh, excuse me. Almost coughed there. You could tell I've had to struggle a little bit with being under the weather today. Thank you for your patience. Get into NHL playoffs betting with Sports Interaction. Before the game starts, live in play, or how your favorite player will perform. Doing it right since 1997, Sports Interaction is Canada's sportsbook. With the most competitive odds, Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now and see all sports betting has to offer. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. With that, it's time for stick taps. My stick tap's a little bit more general. It is June. It is Pride Month. A lot of people are going to take an opportunity to just slap on a rainbow sticker and just be like, hey, happy Pride, but don't use that as just just to do that. Use that as an opportunity to educate yourself on the history of Pride. Use that to continue to make yourself more tolerant if you aren't already about people in the LGBTQ community as well. Take your time to, again, educate yourself. Guys like Brock McGillis are so great to listen to hear speak, either on documentaries. They did a little mini feature with Sportsnet the other day. So yeah, take the time to do that. And also June is National Indigenous History Month as well. We know over the last how many years we are getting more and more exposure to the atrocities that Indigenous communities have experienced, especially in Canada, with what has taken place with residential schools. With June, don't just be the person who just puts up a post on IG and feel your work is done. You know, take the opportunity to educate and listen to people from those two communities about what is going on with them. So a bit of an interesting stick tap, but just for anyone who's trying to just either fly those flags or just educate themselves, or just bringing awareness to those things with the LGBTQ community or the Indigenous community. Salute to you guys. So those are my stick taps.
Yeah, shout out to our pal Robert Malloy as well, and lots of great voices in the space. You know, mine. I'll just go hockey because I should have probably went first. Yours was much more eloquent, Julian, as usual. But I'm going to give mine to Valtteri Filppula. You know, I've spoken in recent episodes about my love for the World Hockey Championship. Really cool to see him post NHL career to win the World Championship with Finland last weekend, to join the Triple Gold Club, and be the first Finn to do so. You know, Finland's a country that is near and dear to my heart, a place that I have a lot of friends from, and loves the sport that's given me my livelihood. So cool to see Filppula join that group. And as I think that it won't be much longer before we're seeing more Finns get there. We just need a few more to get their hands on the Stanley Cup or you know, play in future World Championships, because that country is clearly on the rise in the world of hockey.
100%. And that's going to do it for this Thursday edition of the Chris Johnston Show. CJ, always a pleasure to do these shows with you, whether I'm at 100% or at more of a 50-55.
This was your flu game episode, man.
Yeah. I got through it. I mean, it could be a lot worse, you know. But
so producer Nick gave up coffee this week. You're sick. I mean, I guess I got to carry this thing every once in a while. I mean, I'm usually on your guys' back.
I don't know, man. I feel like you do enough with the insight and the hijinks, you know, some of the hand stuff that you bring from episode to episode. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, fine. You know, you have the CJ game, but this is a team effort. We all find a way to contribute equally here on the CJ Show. We do a damn good job at it too.
There's no I in team, but there is an I in Julian, Chris, and Nick.
Yes. Yes, there is. That is very, very true. That's why CJ is one of the best in the biz, people, coming up with smart, intelligent observations like he just did. If you are listening to this, now is the time to get your questions in for Monday's episode. Ask CJ. You could, if you're on Discord, put it on the questions channel, or tweet at reporter Chris with the hashtag Ask CJ, and we'll try to get to those questions for the Ask CJ segment on the Monday. Check out all of the other great shows on the SDPN network. And yeah, that's going to do it. For Siege, I'm Julian. So long. Peace. Back on Monday, and I hope I sound a lot better than I sound right now.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter at Reporter Chris. And follow Julian McKenzie at JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.